A Song for Silas by Laurie Wick. Chapter 27. Amy was seeing Doc Schaefer out, so Silas took the opportunity to speak with Grant alone. Silas was beginning to think Grant was a mind reader when he stepped into the bedroom, and Grant said, "Shut the door, Silas. I want to talk with you." When Silas was seated in the rocking chair near the bed, Grant seemed at a loss for words. He cleared his throat twice, and still he hesitated. Silas knew he was about to be thanked, and so he stepped in, hoping to put it off. "I'd like to come back, Grant." "Come back?" "Yes, I have every confidence that you'll be on your feet, but I'd still like to come back and give you a hand." "You don't have to do that, Silas." Grant was very pleased with the offer, but this young man had already done so much. "Actually, Grant, I'd be returning for selfish reasons. This is the first planting I've done on my own, and I'd like to see the fruits of my labors." The older man's hand came out, and they shook. "Thanks, Silas. I'll count on you. You come when you can." "I'll wait until my brother-in-law, Mac, starts his harvesting, and then I'll write that I'm coming." Silas stood to go. One more thing, Grant. Please don't say anything to Amy about my coming back. I'd like to do that myself." "Sure, Silas. I understand." The men nodded to one another in understanding, and Silas exited the room. Silas sat despondently at the supper table and watched Amy look at everything but him. Even if he put a question to her directly, she answered his chin, never once looking him in the eye. Grant didn't miss the byplay between Silas and his daughter, and he struggled to hold his tongue. He knew that whatever was between them, they would have to work out. Nevertheless, he would not stand for Amy being rude to Silas or making him feel unwelcome in their home. When Silas refused both a second helping of supper and dessert, and excused himself from the table, Grant determined to talk with Amy. But once they were alone, Amy gave up all pretense of eating and sat looking at the door Silas had just walked through. Just the pain written on his daughter's face was enough to stay any comment Grant had been ready to make. Amy was miserable. She knew Silas was hurting, and the relationship they'd known was changed, possibly forever. Also, Silas was leaving tomorrow, and guilt lay heavy on Amy's heart for the relief she felt. What was the matter with her? How could she be so cruel? If only Silas's feelings hadn't changed, and they could have just stayed friends. Amy would probably have sat at the table toying with her food all evening, but Silas reappeared in the doorway. "I'm not positive, but I believe Bev Randall is coming this way." Amy rushed to the window, and Grant craned his neck to try and see. Amy turned back to the room. "It is Aunt Bev." She paused, and then nodded. "I'm not sure I want to know why she's here." "Well," Grant spoke briskly to cover his own feeling of trepidation, "that won't change the fact that she is. If someone will help me into the living room, we'll find out what's going on." Silas moved to assist him. For all Grant's business-like words, Silas thought he looked worried. Clearly in a state of high agitation, Bev Randall would not take a seat. She paced back and forth as Grant sat watching her in bewilderment. "I was just furious when he told me. I stood up to Evan for the very first time." Here she stopped in front of Grant and faced him squarely. "I told him to reinstate your loan, or I'd be on the next train out of town." "Oh, Bev, you didn't!" Grant was truly horrified. As harsh as Evan's actions had been, nothing was worth Bev and Evan's marriage. "Yes, I did, and I'm not sorry. Evan never tells me anything until the act is complete, or we could have avoided all of this." Bev had resumed her pacing, but again she stopped and put a trembling hand to her throat. "I never dreamed he would do such a thing, that you should suffer for—" A short silence hung in the room. "Well," Bev visibly composed herself. Once again the elegant banker's wife was firmly back in place. "You're going to think me a fishwife, screeching and stomping about. Now, Amy, I do believe I could do with a cup of coffee." "Oh, of course, Aunt Bev." Amy jumped up to do her bidding, still in a state of shock over all that had transpired. Bev stayed a long time and told them of the situation in town. "The townspeople this week have been out of their heads, storming the bank, sure that Evan was taking their money. There were stories of 40 robberies, if you can imagine. Their panic was so great, yet no one had a single fact. They were shouting at the sheriff for justice, and believe it or not, he came to the bank's rescue. He's a good man, you know. Well, he told the bank patrons he had a full-scale investigation going on, and that things were under control. He had already collected some valuable evidence, and none of it pointed to anyone at the bank. He was also putting extra men on the job in an attempt to curtail the thefts. Bev soon left after her report, and Amy cleared away the cups before joining Silas and Grant in the living room. They talked and sat, but each was emotionally drained, and it wasn't long before they were all seeking their beds and thanking God for a miracle in the form of Bev Randall.